A couple of weeks ago, I got a video request from one of my patrons, Lily. She brought to my attention an account by somebody called Orion asking me to break down his content. At first, he seemed to me just your run-of-the-mill manosphere content creator with video topics such as men are the prize and women want it all. But then I noticed something concerning. This man has a PsyD, which is the same degree that I have. So at that point, I realized, oh, this guy is using his perceived expertise as a psychologist to spread a very dangerous anti-woman message. And who better to explain why his rhetoric is not based on any credible psychological theories than a woman who also has a doctorate in psychology. Let's do just that. So Dr. Taraban calls his psychology psych hacks, which sounds great in theory, but the issue is that he hasn't truly provided any psych hacks or any evidence-based psychoeducation on his channel in about 3 years. 4 years ago when Dr. Taraban first started his channel, his videos were on respectable, scientifically sound topics, such as how to let people be wrong and use emotions to make better decisions. And then about a year in, something curious happened. He published a video titled, "Guys, Find Your Ugly Duckling or How to Find a Good Woman," which got about 10 times the amount of views that he was typically getting around that time. For the most part, he went back to his regularly scheduled videos, but more and more manosphere-sounding titles started to get peppered in there, until eventually pretty much all of his content started to sound very woman-negative. Women treat men the way men treat jobs. Women punish the men they like. Women want it all, which has 427,000 views, juxtaposed with the video right before it, which was about neglected kinds of love, which only got 8,400 views. The redpill content got about 50 times more engagement than his regular content. Dr. Taraban's more recent content seems to be largely based on what the redpill community calls sexual market value. According to this theory, relationships between men and women can be simplified into an economic system. Men and women hold value to potential or actual sexual partners based on different things. Men based on income, women based on youth and age. The sexual market value theory is not credible or scientifically sound in the field of psychology. It greatly exaggerates and oversimplifies tiny seeds of truth from theories that do exist, such as the social exchange theory, which says that relationships are all a cost-benefit analysis and they require some level of reciprocity for them to be healthy, or the mating strategies theory, which says that people use different mating strategies whether they're pursuing a short-term or long-term partner. Evolutionary psychology does love to talk about how men on average prefer younger and more beautiful partners, and women do on average tend to prefer men who have higher income due to evolutionary reasons. However, even when averages do exist, they're probabilistic, not deterministic, meaning it would be accurate to say women self-report preferring blank trait on average, but it's not scientifically supported to say women will always go for a Chad. And in fact, even within evolutionary psychology, large meta-analyses have raised questions into the assumption that men and women really do prefer these things. When those differences exist, effect size tend to be quite small, which suggests there are other, a lot more important variables at play in what draws people to each other. Gender equality in society tends to greatly reduce those differences. What people say they want in self-report questionnaires is often not what they actually go for in reality. And so the truth seems to be that women tend to report prioritizing financial resources in a partner slightly higher than men do, and men tend to report wanting attractiveness and youth in a partner slightly more than women do. Evolutionary forces, of course, play a role in mate selection, but red pillars way exaggerate that role. And in my opinion, evolutionary psychology is one of the weakest subfields of psychology. What else is at play in attraction? Human attraction is highly culture-bound, time-dependent, individual, and attachment-focused. Like in the early 2000s, it was considered attractive to be very heroin chic and wear low-cut pants, whereas in the 2010s, it was the complete opposite. Women were supposed to be curvy and wear high-waisted pants. One woman might be attracted to a man who's financially successful, while another might not care at all about it. And in fact, there is certainly no shortage of examples in society of women who end up with men who do not support them whatsoever. Attraction is also attachment-based. It's not about what value that person brings to your life, but it's also about the bond that you ideally develop with them, which is why, for example, when someone's partner falls sick, people often continue to take care of them even though they're not really getting anything out of the relationship anymore. In reality, attraction is not as simple as all men and all women benefit from relationships and want these specific things, which can distill a person's value into a concrete number. But let's look at some of Dr. Taraban's claims more closely. Starting with this video that he titles his ideal woman a useful 8. Because obviously we are all itching to know what Dr. Taraban's ideal woman is.
I'm Dr. Orion Taraban, and this is Psych Hacks, Better Living Through Psychology. And the topic for today's short talk is a useful 8. So from time to time, I receive a specific question from both men and women. Orion, you talk so much about sexual relationships, so tell us, what is your ideal woman? Here it is. For me, an ideal woman is a useful 8.
So let's break down the two components of this sentence. Useful, which relies on this very self-centered, transactional outlook of relationships, and 8, which relies on a very objectifying view of relationships, which again boils down a person's value into one numerical score. Starting with the first part, useful. What, you might ask, does Dr. Taraban thinks makes a woman useful? Well, serving a man.
Well, it means that she must actively generate value. And 8, to be helpful. A good woman, a smart woman, once she secures access to a man, starts to look around, starts to carefully observe a man's life and what he is trying to accomplish in order to identify opportunities where she can be of service. But Orion, some women will say, why would I want to serve a man?
I think I just threw up in my mouth a little bit. That's a pretty disgusting way to view dynamics between men and women. It reveals a very hierarchical view of the genders, where women are relinquished to the role of servant. They're basically beneath men. Now, as you'll see later on in the video, Dr. Taraban likes to redefine words. So let's look at the actual definition of servant so that he can't sort of backtrack and pull a Mott and Bailey fallacy. A servant is an individual who performs duties about the person or home of a master or personal employer. So here we get an idea that is going to continue to come up in his content, that men are kind of like women's employers, and that romantic relationships should involve a woman doing things for a man that make his life easier. Now, what effect do you think this will have on relationships? What effect do you think it would have if people hearing Dr. Taraban's way of viewing things will also adopt it for themselves? Women will internalize the message that they are below men, that their worth is dependent on them making somebody else's life easier. And so they're probably going to stay in relationships with men who mistreat them, who confirm that belief that they're beneath them. Men are going to internalize the message that they are above women, and they're therefore going to feel more justified to mistreat women if they so desire. Because as we know based on the most recent research, mistreating other people basically boils down to entitlement and a sense of superiority. And regardless of gender, the relationship will deteriorate between two people hearing this, because one or both partners will start to see it as transactional. And recent research has shown us how it's incredibly corrosive to treat relationships like transactions and to keep score. This recent long-term study from Germany found that when partners expect something in return for favors or sacrifices, their relationship satisfaction declines. It seems to be a pretty immediate predictor of a drop in the relationship satisfaction. Partners keep score, and immediately afterwards, their relationship quality plummets. There's no evidence in the study that people who are unhappier tend to then view relationships as more transactionally. The opposite seems to be true. And even if both partners are equally transactional in their view, that doesn't seem to help their relationship satisfaction. So a psychologist who encourages people to objectify each other and views relationships as transactional either doesn't have a good grasp of what science actually tells us is good for relationships, or doesn't really care and is just giving bad advice for profit. In reality, happy relationships are based on teamwork, positive regard, friendship. Reducing human beings to an economic framework is a recipe for relational unhappiness. What about the second half of his sentence, an 8?
The 8 has to do with her perceived sexual marketplace value, or PSMV. A PSMV of 8 means that to me, within my own perception, the woman in question is an 8 out of 10. So she needs to be fairly attractive. Like, I've discovered that a woman must have a PSMV of at least 8 for me to maintain consistent sexual interest in her. As I've mentioned previously, my rule of thumb here is that I should be able to walk into most rooms with a given woman and want to leave with the woman I brought. If I walk into too many rooms too often and I see other women I'd rather be leaving with, I'm just going to be real. It's very unlikely that that relationship is going to last, as I'm going to be emotionally pulled in other directions.
Studies also show that people who objectify others tend to be higher in the dark tetrad traits, which as a reminder are narcissism, psychopathy, sadism, and Machiavellianism. They tend to be more exploitative, more entitled, to experience issues in having happy relationships. The researchers said, our findings suggest that a propensity for objectification is predicted by an unwillingness to maintain positive relationships with others, lower intellectual openness, higher entitlement and exploitativeness, and low tendency to positively respond to others' favors. Dr. Taraban says he can't really maintain sexual interest in a woman who's below an 8. Otherwise, he has a wandering eye. And of course, sexual attraction is important in a relationship. It's a key piece of the puzzle. But if your interest in your partner is dependent on external stimuli, meaning what other women you see when you go out into the world, I find that pretty sad and ego-driven. Notice Dr. Taraban's language when he talks about relationships. He says sexual relationship, not romantic or intimate relationship. In long-term partnerships, sexual attraction is not the most important thing or the only thing that matters. It might be the initial spark that draws two people to each other, and hopefully it's strong enough to last a lifetime. But that initial spark should ideally also open the door for vulnerability, emotional closeness, trust, care, respect, teamwork, support. Relationship science tends to distinguish between initial attraction and relational arousal, meaning the draw you feel towards someone with whom you've developed a deep long-term relationship. If you find yourself not wanting to be faithful to someone because there are other more attractive options out there, it begs the question, have you ever actually developed a deep enough relationship with someone where you know what that relational arousal even is? And if you haven't ever experienced that, are you really in a position to be giving people relationship advice? Or are you just encouraging them to also adopt your stunted, transactional, objectifying view of other people? Studies also show that people tend to end up in relationships with people who are similar in attractiveness to them. So if you're going to expect an above average attractive woman, it's probably only realistic to expect that if you yourself are above average in attractiveness. Of course, there are exceptions. There are always people who date out of their league, as people say. But if you feel entitled to a woman who is substantially more attractive than you, I do have to give a little bit of a side eye to that, because remember, entitlement in relationships is a pretty dangerous ingredient. Now, why, you might ask, doesn't he want a woman who's above 8 in attractiveness? Well, folks, it seems like this man believes in the crazy hot matrix, which is all very scientific and credible.
Because, in my experience, women much higher than an 8 tend to come with a whole host of problems. Like, I'm sure you've seen the crazy hot matrix. There's some truth to that. I've dated some women who were pretty high up in terms of their PSMV, and while there certainly were some enjoyable aspects to that experience, these women were also just a fucking handful. These women are kind of like exotic supercars. Yes, they look amazing. Yes, they turn heads and inspire envy. Yes, you're going to feel like $1 million when you pull up to the spot with one. But there are so many hidden costs and inconveniences with respect to their maintenance. They're just not practical cars, and they are extremely expensive to acquire and maintain. Like, the work is never ending, in large part because the intrasexual competition is relentless. I'd get up to go to the bathroom at a restaurant, and there would almost always be guys hitting on them when I got back.
The matrix that he's talking about shows how even the most prized, valued women in a misogynistic person's worldview, a woman who's attractive, is devalued and objectified, reduced to her attractiveness, to the point where she cannot possibly hold any other positive traits, because that would humanize her too much. If you concede that a woman has value, it has to be the only metric across which she holds value. Because if you can also say, oh, well, she's also kind of funny, and she's kind, and she's smart, you veer way too close to actually viewing her as a human being. Now, Dr. Taraban's next video is titled, Men Are the Prize. Oh boy. Before we dive in, I have a question for you. Do you like my thumbnail for this video? I recently switched up the style of my thumbnails because I had a couple of thumbnails commissioned by someone who does them professionally, and when I did that, I got a lot of compliments on the new thumbnail style. So I was looking at the new style and I was looking at the old style, and I was kind of like, what's the difference between them? Really, like, what is appealing to people about this new style of thumbnail? And I wanted to learn how to make catchy thumbnails for myself. So I went to Skillshare to do that, who are kindly sponsoring this portion of the video. Skillshare has creative classes for professionals, hobbyists, and everyone in between. They're taught by professional creatives and entrepreneurs. Every class that I've watched on Skillshare is super user-friendly, where you can just dive into something as a beginner without knowing really any background, and they're broken down based on category, and they have like concrete manuals for how to implement what you learn on there. You can learn whatever and whenever you want. So I took this class, How to Create Irresistible YouTube Thumbnails, and I learned a lot. And I've since changed a few things about my thumbnails. I made my head bigger in the thumbnail. I made the contrast higher on my face, and I've started trying to use like a black ombre effect to bring more attention to the middle of the thumbnail. So let me know what you think about the changes. And the first 500 people to use my Skillshare link will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So check the link in the description or click on the QR code on screen to give them a try. Get started today. Okay, let's look at this video. Men are the prize. Red pillars claim that men are the prize. Sprinkle content creators claim that women are the prize. In reality, I'm sorry to break it to you guys, no one is the prize in a relationship. A relationship consists of two human beings who should both feel valued and value the other person. If only one person feels like the prize and they do not prize their partner, that's an uneven dynamic that's not likely to last long or to be very happy.
So there seems to be a perennial debate online about who is the prize in modern relationships. Is the woman the prize or is the man the prize? And I'm here to weigh in on the matter because I think I can resolve this once and for all. Listen to me. If a top-shelf woman is a diamond, a top-shelf man is a diamond mine. Why? Because men are disproportionately the producers of value. On a global level, men, through their labor and effort and ingenuity, produce far more than their fair share of global GDP. And when you rise up the scale and examine the demographic characteristics of millionaires and billionaires, this observation becomes even more true. Like all the 20 richest men in the world built something. On the other hand, all the 20 richest women in the world received their wealth through divorce or inheritance. So if we're comparing apples to apples, that is a top-shelf woman to a top-shelf man, the conclusion is obvious. No one, man or woman, no one is going to prefer a single diamond, no matter how lovely, to a diamond mine.
Dr. Taraban claims that top-shelf men make value while top-shelf women receive it. So he really kind of tells on himself for how he completely neglects everything that women contribute to society. There's this notion in the manosphere that men are the only ones contributing. Men are the only ones inventing and furthering society, when in reality, women make up the majority of healthcare workers, the majority of education workers, the majority of childcare workers, both within and outside the home. And I can already hear the misogynistic clapback. But those are female fields, which means they are intrinsically devoid of any value because the masculine fields are the ones that are actually important. Okay, women also have important contributions to more traditionally masculine fields as well. Take, for example, in STEM, the woman who discovered nuclear fission, the antidote to malaria, the helix shape of DNA. In business, when women are in top-up leadership positions, those institutions tend to perform better. Women's leadership style has also been found to be more effective than men's in certain ways. But of course, a misogynist would respond, oh, but those are just a few contributions. They're just a minority compared to men's contributions. It's almost like men was, until very, very recently, and arguably still to this point, structured in a way that women couldn't take part in a lot of those industries that men were contributing to. Women literally couldn't seek an education. They couldn't get involved in highly cerebral work. It's kind of like telling women, you're not allowed to come into the smart people room, then bolting it shut. And then when a few women manage to break in and claw their way into the smart people room saying, see, only a couple women are in the smart people room. There's been a very clear pattern across history where traditionally female-dominated fields are initially devalued, and then once men get involved in them, suddenly we prop them up as really valuable, important fields. An example is how women used to be a lot of the medical workers. If we look at, the precursors to medicine, they were the ones doing midwifery, they were the ones doing herbal medicine, experimenting with trial and error to see what works to cure certain diseases, and then men got involved, called it medicine, medicine, and now we greatly value that field. But also traditionally male-dominated fields, once women get involved in them, they are devalued. So you might not know this, but nursing actually used to be male-dominated and very respected. And then once women got involved in nursing, we decided as a society that it's not important. So we have the fact that women were literally gatekept from certain fields. We have this phenomenon where anything that women get involved in seems to lose all its value, according to society. We also have a lot of men across history who straight up took credit for men's work and stole a lot of the credit for the inventions that they made. And when women provide value to society because of implicit biases such as the ones Dr. Taraban demonstrates, they're often not even believed. You know, like a lot of the times back in the day, female authors, it was assumed that like their husbands had written the books for them because it was like, how could a woman possibly write so well? It's just not possible. So Dr. Taraban's entire premise that men create value and women have it handed to them reveals a lot more about his sexist worldview than it does about actual society. So his thesis in this video is that women are diamonds, but men are diamond mines, which would sound so clever if it weren't entirely based on a faulty assumption. If that's what you think, then go be with a man. Literally, no one is forcing you to date women if you think they're so useless. Dr. Taraban also doesn't seem to hold older women in very high regard either.
And of course, a diamond's luster is going to fade, whereas a mine is likely to produce more value over the same period.
The implication being that aging reduces a woman's value, which once again boils down a woman's value to her reproductive capabilities. It completely erases all of the ways that women contribute to society that is not dependent on their bodies or their appearance. I can only imagine the effect it would have on an older woman hearing this, to feel like, oh my God, I literally have no worth in this world. So like, why am I even here?
And at the end of the day, women agree with me.
No, we don't. You don't speak for us. His next video is titled The Reality of Modern Family.
The archetypal modern family is a nuclear family. That is, a family consisting of a couple with a child or two living together by themselves in a single household. This isn't exactly new. However, what is novel is that in the vast majority of cases in today's day and age, both parents are working. And it's this fact that creates a lot of the ridiculousness that I'm going to discuss.
Dr. Taraban's idea of this like old nuclear family is incredibly revisionist, filled with historical inaccuracies, and it has a very Western sort of like ethnocentric approach. In most cultures, parents and children cohabitated with or near extended family, and child rearing was much more of a communal group effort than we tend to think of this like 1950s view of the family where we have like a mom and a dad and two kids raising kids on their own. In Eastern Europe, where I come from, I was raised until the age of 4 by my grandma. My cousin lived with our grandma until his mid-30s. I have one aunt who still lives with her mom at age 70 and one aunt who lives in the same house as her in-laws. It's also very revisionist to act like women were always just staying at home raising the kids. Throughout history, most women were working, either as peasants or doing some sort of manual labor or some sort of craftsmanship. It was only the upper class women who stayed at home, which obviously is a minority of women.
Modern women are now financially dependent on their employers, who are typically male.
Modern women are now financially dependent on their employers. Yeah, so are men. Notice how he does this thing where he manipulates the narrative by only giving selective information, by only talking about half of the situation. He could have said modern people are financially dependent on their employers, but he specifically singled out modern women because of the narrative that he's trying to send. It's the same phenomenon as when a lot of red pillars will talk about the male rate, where they say, you know, men are victims because men tend to take their own lives at higher rates. And yet what they're completely neglecting is that, yes, while men tend to complete suicide at higher rates, women tend to attempt it at higher rates. And this is not like a suffering contest, right? Like, it's not about like, oh, well, that means the women suffer more than men and we should feel worse for them. We should have compassion for both of these groups of people, for sure. But only talking about half of the equation that makes it convenient for you to run with a specific narrative is really manipulative. Because if you presented the other half of the equation as well to people, your narrative would kind of crumble on itself. Think about like in an interpersonal context. Think Think about somebody who's coming to you and saying, oh my God, my friend Lacey, she just completely cut me off. And she said, I don't ever want to hear from you again. And you go, oh my God, like that's so heartless. That's so cold. That's terrible of her. And then you go talk to Lacey and Lacey says, this person killed my cat. Like, of course, I don't want to talk to them anymore because they murdered my cat. Wouldn't you then go to this first person and be like, yo, you completely neglected half of the equation. You didn't tell me the full story because there was something that you wanted me to believe. People do this with argumentation all the time. They selectively choose what information to give you. They cherry pick the information they're presenting so that you will believe their narrative instead of presenting you with the full spectrum of the information at their disposal that doesn't actually fit their narrative. Now, Dr. Taraban says the following about modern families, and he makes sure to say it twice because for some reason he thinks he really ate with that one.
In a modern family, the man is working to earn money so that he can support a woman who is not his wife to raise his children, and the woman is serving a man who is not her husband to secure her desired lifestyle. I will say that again. In a modern family, the man is working to earn money so that he can support a woman who is not his wife to raise his children, and the woman is serving a man who is not her husband to secure her desired lifestyle.
In reality, it reveals a lot more about his biases against women than it does about the true nature of gender dynamics. Notice how the same act, having an employer, is framed very differently based on gender. A woman having an employer is a woman serving her employer. A man having an employer is him trying to earn money so that he can support his family. Men working is being framed as an act of generosity and virtue. Women doing exactly the same thing is framed as an act of selfishness and greed. It also presumes that there used to be a world where men provided and women served, but again, that's not historically accurate. Dr. Taraban claims that this is why birth and marriage rates are plummeting, because people are saying, why bother start a family if things are upside down?
Okay? And if that's the case, then we have to ask, why fucking bother? Seriously. And he doesn't really need to come up with his own theory about why birth and marriage rates are plummeting, because we actually have data that tells us the reasons. In reality, polls show us that both genders do still want both marriage and kids, the majority part of them. But the top reasons they cite for not being able to actualize those desires include financial instability, fear of climate change, and trouble finding the right person. Nowhere in there do we see, how did he put it? In a modern family, the man is working to earn money so that he can support a woman who's not his wife to raise his children, and the woman serving a man who's not her husband to secure her desired lifestyle. Like, that's not a thing that people tend to cite as a reason for why they're not getting married. He's framing it as if most people have this defeatist attitude on relationships. In reality, most people still crave deep emotional bonds with each other, but there are external constraints stopping them from pursuing or achieving the connection that they desire. So what's his proposed solution? Men should strive to make lots of money, and women should marry older men earlier in their life. So what's to be done? Well, men can and should work to become above average. Like, increasing his wealth and prosperity is not only going to benefit that man directly, it's going to allow him to access more and more attractive mating and dating opportunities. Women, on the other hand, have kind of an easier solution, and one that would potentially correct this problem on the population level as well. Namely, they marry older women earlier.
Why is it assumed that men would be the breadwinners in the situation? Even if you think it's better for one person in the family to be the breadwinner, why does it have to be the man automatically? Why does he not advise women to make lots of money? Are you afraid of the competition, Dr. Taraban? Also, advising women to marry older men at a young age seems like remarkably bad advice from a psychologist who should know that the younger people get married, the less it tends to last because their frontal lobes are not developed and there's a chance that they're going to, shift in different directions as time goes on. There's also a pretty large power dynamic between younger women and older men, so he should know that typically puts women at greater risk of coercion or abuses of power. But I have a feeling that he doesn't actually care about what's in women's best interests. His next video is titled Death of the Lady. He says historically there have only been two types of women, ladies and prostitutes.
Death of the lady. In today's day and age, you often hear women complaining. Where are all the real men? Is chivalry dead? Where are the gentlemen? The men who are willing to provide, to commit, to make the effort? Why can't I find a man who will treat me like the lady I am? What is wrong with men these days? Today, I'm going to be answering these questions and more for both men and women. For the better part of known history, there have been only two types of women in the sexual marketplace. There have been ladies and there have been prostitutes. I could use another word here, but I don't want to alienate people in what is already a sensitive discussion. Ladies are women who became wives. Prostitutes are women who didn't.
Let's talk about everything wrong with this statement. First of all, he's redefining words. He's right that these words were social constructs, but his definitions of those social constructs are inaccurate. A prostitute is and always has been a person who sells sex for money. But it's also a very loaded term. It has a lot of stigma. Someone might insult a person who they're trying to demean by saying, oh, you're a prostitute for engaging in extramarital sex, but that's not the definition. The definition of a prostitute is someone who has sex for money, not somebody who has sex outside of marriage. That's not what the definition is. A lady often referred to an upper-class woman who didn't have to do manual work and yes, who adhered to certain strict gender roles, which often included sexual purity, but that's not the whole definition. It wasn't like a lady is a woman who doesn't have sex until marriage. It referred to like respectability politics. A lady was a woman who adhered to respectability politics. By redefining the word lady as virgin until marriage, which is not entirely accurate, it gives him free rein to basically call any woman who isn't a virgin before marriage a whore. The second thing wrong with the statement is that it's extremely black and white and it's a false dichotomy. Dr. Terabin is kind of telling on himself with this one, but he doesn't seem really aware of it. This specific kind of false dichotomy has a name within the field of psychology. It's called a Madonna whore complex. It's a man who categorizes women as either a Madonna, who is pure and self-sacrificial and virginal, or a whore, a woman who is completely devalued and debased, who's considered dirty and cheap to men. This is not a healthy or realistic way to categorize people. People who struggle with a Madonna whore complex typically have some really deep-rooted issues with women. In reality, a lady and a prostitute are not the only two roles for women. These are just labels that men put on women in order to keep them in check, but really women can hold a variety of labels: midwife, teacher, mother, daughter, grandmother, writer, healer, priestess, warrior. It is not historically accurate to act like women have only held two roles throughout society. They have held a wide breadth of roles. You just aren't able to see them for some reason. The third issue that I have with this argument is, what's the opposite of a gentleman then? Remember that selectivity manipulation that I was talking about? How he's only giving us half of the equation, and by not talking about the other half of the equation, it perpetuates his narrative. Women are either ladies or whores, but that leaves out men are either gentlemen or what? Why does he not mention that? Because as far as Dr. Terabin is concerned, men aren't the ones on trial here. It's women's base immorality that we're here to discuss. No different from the days of the witch trials when men were writing manifestos about how women were intrinsically demonic by nature of being female. Dr. Terabin says, ladies are women who became wives, prostitutes are women who didn't. So by that logic, nuns are super slutty then. Empowered women are prostitutes. Can you see where this might be going? Dr. Terabin fundamentally thinks that all women are defined by them selling sex to a man. Ladies just do it after marriage.
If there weren't an underclass of women willing to satisfy men's sexual needs cheaply and easily, well, I doubt that men would long put up with the ladies' nonsense.
What? That doesn't even make any sense. Men put up with their wives because they can get cheap sex elsewhere? If they don't like putting up with their wives, why don't they just not get married and go have that cheap sex their whole lives then? And how would they get their sexual needs met if there weren't that underclass of prostitutes? He again really reveals what he thinks about women with this statement. Their needs and their presence in a man's life is nonsense. Needing to treat a woman like a lady is a burden, almost like he's tired of feigning respect for them because he fundamentally doesn't respect women. Dr. Terabin is again playing with historical facts. We have no reliable evidence that most married men visited prostitutes. It's not like there were reliable questionnaires back in the day asking people, sampling to see how many men were actually going to these women. What we do know is that it was far less common in rural areas than it was in urban areas. It was highest among soldiers, unmarried men, and sailors. And it also depended highly on the the specific culture, which had different norms around prostitution. We also know that the Victorian era may have overestimated the amount of men who were visiting prostitutes in order to justify their moral campaigns. Up next, Dr. Taraban says that ladies and prostitutes are so similar.
And of course, the biggest reason why ladies and prostitutes have hated each other is, frankly, they're so similar.
Here we go. This is where I had a feeling we were going. While technically it's true, because these are social constructs, these are labels that men put on women in order to keep them down, I suspect Dr. Taraban likes saying that ladies and prostitutes are not so different, just so that he can say that all women are whores.
I could use another word here, but I don't want to alienate people in what is already a sensitive discussion.
He uses loaded language to fuel his audience's hatred of women, to frame all women as basically morally impure and worthless. Because essentially what he's saying is, women are either respectable or unrespectable. And even the respectable ones are actually not so respectable, so all women are unrespectable. And the last video that we're going to watch of his today is called Modern Women, which is part 2 to his precursor where he was talking about how all women are whores. Here, he takes his argument to its inevitable conclusion. He claims that a Victorian lady would be deeply offended by a modern woman's idea of romance.
Consider, for instance, how a lady of the 19th century might respond to a proposal based on a successful modern courtship. Let's see. What's a good outcome by today's standards? How about this? The man plans a date and puts some effort into the experience. He picks her up, takes her out to dinner. Over the meal, he puts her at ease. He makes her laugh, asks her questions, tries to understand their shared values. He wants a relationship and seems to care about the woman's feelings. He's clearly attracted to her, but he doesn't want to move too fast. So they go on 1 date, 2 dates, 3 dates. Finally, at the end of the 3rd date, he invites her in for a cup of tea, and the two give in to their desires and sleep together. So what's the point? My point is, exactly. Share this summary with most modern women, and this sounds unproblematic, possibly even desirable. They probably wouldn't feel anything's wrong here. However, if you were to share this summary with a 19th century lady, you'd end up getting slapped. You think the price of my womanhood is 3 dates? Who do you think you're talking to? How dare you insult my virtue like this? Go find yourself a good time girl in the red light district if that's what you're looking for. But I don't think you'd find many modern women who saw anything all that problematic in this summarized process. And any modern woman who did act that way is probably a raging hypocrite, because chances are she's not a virgin, which means that she has already been willing to transact her sexual opportunity without a lifetime of commitment and provision. And that means, despite any protestations to the contrary, at least according to the traditional definition, that she is no longer a lady.
It's almost like the word lady is a social construct, and norms of behavior change over time, therefore what a lady actually means also changes over time. His argument is kind of like saying if you were to take someone from 100 years ago and show them a modern day person with mental illness, they would say lobotomize that person, institutionalize them immediately. This means they had the right idea, and we should lobotomize that person. In reality, we don't lobotomize people anymore because we've evolved, we've learned a lot, we've gained a different set of values and norms over the course of our historical development. And so someone from 100 years ago might think that that's naturally the right conclusion, but that doesn't mean that they're right. It doesn't mean that the way we're currently doing things should be assessed by somebody who had the mindset of 100 years ago.
Women today use the word lady not to signify that they actually put sex on the other side of marriage, but to suggest that they have a relatively low body count.
No, we don't. Most people don't use the term lady anymore because, again, it's outdated. We don't really think about things in that way anymore. But on the rare cases when I do hear someone using the word lady, the definition has sort of shifted to mean a high-class woman or a woman who respects herself enough to not tolerate mistreatment. So I sometimes hear women saying, like, I'm a lady who, like, wear designer clothes, for example. Or I sometimes hear people saying I'm a lady when they're referring to, like, not responding to to a "are you up" text at 3 a.m. Dr. Taraban really needs to stop redefining words. And then he finally says it, folks, any woman who isn't a virgin at marriage is a prostitute.
Modern women exchange their sexual opportunity outside of marriage, and they often proudly discuss their low body counts. They do this because they believe that their low number means that they're not prostitutes, like some sluts out there. But that's kind of like a murderer denying he's a serial killer because he's only killed like 5 or 6 times. You want a serial killer? Go talk to Stalin or Mao. I'm practically a law-abiding citizen in comparison.
Remember, that is not the definition of a prostitute, never was. The entire argument that he's making hinges on him manipulating a definition. He gives this metaphor about like serial killers. This is a false equivalence based on a faulty definition. A woman having sex before marriage is not the same as a serial killer. Again, he's really revealing more about his worldview with that analogy. He's also doing this thing where he moralizes women's specific behavior in order to degrade their character. If you do X, then you're insert this very global character label that's a very ugly, stigmatized word. It's kind of like how when people say like, if you, what's something like very small and specific, like lean your chair back on a plane, then you are a narcissist. I'm having trouble keeping count of all of his fallacies in this line of argumentation. False binary, category error, revision of history, moral equivalence. And his conclusion is, well, of course there are no more gentlemen out there because ladies are obsolete, so therefore gentlemen are also obsolete. A gentleman is typically defined as a man who treats women with respect. You know, who holds open the door for them, who picks them up so that they don't have to Uber to the date. In modern times, that's our definition of a gentleman. So if a gentleman is a man who treats a woman with respect, and there are no more gentlemen and it's women's fault, oh, I see where he's going with this. It's women's fault that men no longer treat them with respect. Got it, of course. Then he says, modern women are bad at being ladies because they're whores, and they're bad at being prostitutes because they charge so little. And he says, I'm not arguing that we go back to the way things were, just that we see modern women as whores, I guess. Got it. Listen, whenever red pillars' arguments are criticized, they resort to very predictable counter-arguments. I'm just telling the truth. It's the truth even if you don't like to hear it. What I'm saying is based on facts and logic and science, and you're just emotional because you don't like it. But I hope this video has showed that in reality, their talking points are very far from scientific and logical. Sexual market value is a fringe online theory that has potential to seriously harm relationships, and a psychologist should know better than that, especially one who describes himself as providing valuable psychological knowledge to people. Dr. Taraban makes logical sounding arguments, but they're based on faulty definitions, revisionist history, sexist biases, inaccurate assumptions. He completely erases women's contributions as a way of justifying why women hold no value. He frames a Madonna whore complex as objective truth. He shares only half the equation when it's convenient for him. He uses loaded language, and even the same exact phenomenon, if applied to men, is used in much more respectful language than if applied to women. His conclusions have the potential to really put women in harm's way. I'd argue that following his dating advice is not only dangerous to relationships as a whole, but specifically to women's safety. I don't know if he genuinely believes the stuff he's spewing or if he's just capitalizing off a profitable niche. To be honest, I don't give a fuck. I'm honestly ashamed to have the same degree as him. Thank you for watching. Take care.
Tell me